Well, good morning. We're here again, here in London, and thank you so much for coming. It's just great to have you here. And this event, as you know, is part of London EdTech Week, and which will run for the next few days, and please take advantage of some of the other events that are here happening in London. London, as you probably know, is probably the biggest EdTech center in Europe. It has more EdTech companies headquartered here than anywhere else in Europe. So what's this all about? Well, first of all, it's about connecting. So I think just to start the day and to warm things up, perhaps you could just introduce each of you to your immediate neighbor. Just say hi, who you are, just as a little bit of a warm welcome. Right. I knew there was a danger in this, is that you'll never stop talking. Okay.
That's it.
Enough talking. It's a bit like back to the classroom, I'm afraid. So a bit more silence in class. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce you to Benjamin Vedrenne-Cloquet, who co-founded this event with me and the rest of our team. And so, Benjamin.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to EdTechX.
So this year's theme is focused on learning. Learning is, for us, the most important driver for the 21st century. And in a world which is experiencing huge transformation, then what we think is the biggest innovation within that is actually the learning process itself. So for us, learning is truly the new tech. But before Benjamin and I give you some insights into what is happening, in our view, across the landscape in education and training, I wanted to highlight some of the things that we've been up to in the ecosystem. And in an ecosystem, you need a number of different ingredients. You need to assemble the different parts, you need the fuel to make it happen, and then you need to ignite that. And for our own part, we've been assembling, as you know, in the way that we are doing here today, but we've been doing that right across the world. 5 cities in sub-Saharan Africa earlier this year, in China at the end of last year, and 5 further events here in Europe this year. All told, we've been connecting people, 20,000 people across the globe who have an interest in learning. And so thank you for coming today, but you're very much part of a global community that's trying to drive this ecosystem. So what's the fuel? Well, the fuel for us is really the business that I founded back in 2003, which is a business called IBIS Capital, which is involved in bringing capital into this market. It's about helping with strategically with both M&A and creating alliances for businesses. And then with that, we've been doing a number of different transactions in different parts of the world. We've done deals in China with Wall Street English, which we took out of Pearson. We've been doing deals in Mexico with learning centers called Harman Hall. And then recently back here in Europe, helping with the fundraising of FutureLearn, bringing in Seek, the very large employment and education group based out of Australia. So what's the last bit? Well, it's about igniting this whole ecosystem. And again, for our part, we've tried to do something that is new. What we have achieved back in October last year was to launch the first NASDAQ vehicle specifically focused on education and training. And what we were keen to do was to provide a source of capital for this market, which was using the public markets where there's a huge scarcity of education and training assets, and to take advantage of the cheaper capital and the demand from institutional investors. And so Benjamin and I launched that last October, and it's about combining with businesses anywhere in the world who are looking to access that type of capital and use it to consolidate and grow within the sector. We often get asked why this particular interest, and it really comes down to the fact that we see there is a triple opportunity within the education and training space. It's about globalization, consolidation, and digitization, But in other industries, that process has been one that has taken place sequentially. In other words, one after another. What's interesting about in the education and training market is that that has been a different process. It's been one where that has happened simultaneously. And that means that it's a very different process, a much more rushed and chaotic environment while we try and find the different routes in terms of trying to build businesses within this sector. And there are no real clear winners at this stage. But the key emphasis is the fact that it's around these three trends that we've been talking about. But back here in Europe, it's not so easy. And the reason it's not so easy is that there's much less capital that's been made available to this part of the market compared to other sectors. So, by way of example, only 8%, which represents of the 8.1 billion amount of money that have been invested into the education EdTech sector, have been done in European companies. And if you compare that to places like China and the US, you can see how we're disadvantaged by the flow of capital into this sector. And it's really important, this capital, because that capital is about investing in skills for the 21st century. And in a competitive landscape against nations, that investment will make a big difference in the landscape for the future. And what will this mean? Well, let me hand over to Benjamin, who will explain further.
Thank you, Charlie. This funding gap is the reason why EdTechXEurope exists. And I think our job collectively won't be done before we fix this. And it's important we fix this because if you take a long view, you'll realize, and some of you were here last year, saw this already, that EdTech and more broadly artificial intelligence and learning are about to become the main economic driver of the 21st century. So put very simply, the pre-industrial economy was about cultivation and extraction to maximize food and resources. The industrial economy was about manufacturing and services to maximize consumption and profit. And the knowledge economy will be about how we use learning and artificial intelligence to maximize human potential. So after demography, after technology, learning and AI are about to become a new engine of growth, a massive one. $13 trillion of additional economic growth, according to McKinsey. So that's massive. Just to put things in perspective, $13 trillion, that's a new China popping up in 10 years, or 2/3 of a new North America or EU, without the need for a trade war. That's the equivalent of 6 times the global oil industry, without any adverse impact on the environment. So that's pretty big, and so that's why we think that learning is the new tech. Learning is the new tech is also what 30 million learners on Coursera are telling us. That's the most studied subject. The science of learning, deep learning, machine learning, how to learn, artificial intelligence, is ranking ahead Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, cybersecurity. So the most studied course on Coursera. It's also a very hot topic talked about in companies. And you've got here a quote from a chief executive at Manpower. I really believe the CEO needs to become the chief learning officer of their company. And I don't think CEOs spend enough time thinking about learning in their organization. And what's interesting here is the semantic shift. 10, 15 years ago, we could have read the same sentence with the word technology in it. And it's now replaced by learning. So we start to hear tech companies priding themselves and talking about being learning companies or knowledge companies. We hear much more about CLOs than CTOs. Venture capitalists and tech investors soon will say, well, we'd like to invest in knowledge companies. Learning is the new tech as well because AI and AI in education is actually the fastest growing segment in education. It's today 900 million. It will grow by 10x to 2030 to 9 billion. So all these are very clear signals. And there are very clear signals that we're entering a new phase of deep disruption in education, much deeper than before. And if you think of it, let's move back 5, 6 years ago. Back in 2012, 2013, we were at a moment of what I call the Spotify moment in education. EdTech was mostly focused on digitization of content, using light technology that was already proven and adopted in other industries like publishing, music, gaming. And how many times did we hear, we are the Netflix of education, we are the Spotify of education, we are the YouTube of education. And 2013 was also the golden age of EdTech. It was a record year. 573 startups created that year in EdTech. That number declined in 2014, 15, 16, 17. And 6 years later, I think we are reaching what I would call a genomics moment in education. Innovators are focusing on data and efficacy using, this time, much deeper technology. Focusing on data, efficacy, using neuroscience and deep learning. And we start to see as well a new generation of innovators blossoming. This year, or in the past 18 months, we've seen more than 75 AI EdTech startups created. And that number is increasing. And we start to see pioneers as well in the field. And they tend to focus on two efficacy drivers in education. The first one is what we call personalization and predictive analytics. And you've got here examples of two companies. One is Sana Labs from Sweden. Another one is Century Tech. Both of them are here today. Sana Labs is hosting as well tomorrow breakfast at the Google campus, so you can engage with them and listen to them today. And what they do is that they deliver personalization at scale, and that was very difficult to do, and they use machine learning to do this. So that's one driver. The other driver, which is an interesting one, it's engagement and behavior in learning environment. That's a very neglected field, and we start to see new companies focusing on it. One is in the UK, for example, called Class Charts, and what they do is that they use machine learning to capture emotion and behavior in the classroom from pupils. And from there, they gather data, and they are able to suggest to teachers how to build smart learning plans to improve outcomes. That's very interesting, and that's enabled by machine learning. Another one, which has come from China, is a company called Face++, and what they use is artificial intelligence and facial recognition technology. They capture movement of students and pupils, eyebrow spams, smiles. Yes, I know it's scary, but thanks to this, they're able to read the level of attention and understanding of pupils. So all this is very disruptive, and those companies are a great example of this new wave of disruption. But I think to understand really what's coming up, to really understand the level of disruption that we're going to be facing, we need to look outside the classroom. We need to look at what's happening in the factories. We need to look at what's happening in the workplace. Because for centuries, the future of education has actually been driven and influenced by the future of work and production. And today is no exception.
So thank you, Benjamin. So for us, both education and the workplace are inexorably linked. And so talking about one without the other, in our view, is a path to nowhere. And there's transformation that's having a huge impact in terms of the industry, and that transformation is creating a huge skill gap in the marketplace. And it's estimated currently that the impact of that mismatch between the supply of skills and what is demanded in the marketplace is costing the economy globally $13 trillion. So it's not inconsequential in terms of the impact of this particular challenge. And with this challenge, the issue that then has arisen is that we've looked for quick fixes. We haven't looked for long-term systemic change. What we've done is respond very quickly to this mismatch, and by trying to effectively put a plaster over this little, what we see as a gaping wound. And that upskilling urgency, that desire to change the skills, has led to types of learning and processes which are very prevalent at the moment, and you'll see all around. It's about digital replication in terms of content. It's about bite-sized content itself to make it easier to absorb. It's about informal learning. But the impact of all of that is that it's had a knock-on result in terms of the actual workforce. And what we see in terms of this upskilling urgency is the creation of a huge freelance workforce. So they, in terms of how we look at it, is essentially a bite-sized workforce, a workforce that's responded because of the lack of institutional supply of skills and having to learn in a market which is demanding new types of requirements. And what we see is a huge growth, therefore, in the freelance market. 3 times faster than the typical, the overall global market in terms of workforce growth. And, for example, in the United States, already 34% of the workforce is freelance. And what's interesting about that freelance workforce is that 70% of them participated in skills training in the last 6 months, compared to only 49% of the general workforce, and most of their jobs they sought online. But this message of quick fix is also hiding an ugly truth. The ugly truth is that we're not providing a systemic solution to find these right skills for the 21st century. So, what is the systemic fix? Well, for us, what we are interested in is looking at the process of what we call deep learning. It's not just about how humans learn in a deep way, it's about also deep learning in terms of machines' capability and how we can layer those two together. For us, deep learning is the next big revolution that we're going to see, the systemic fix, and it will affect every industry. It's not a new idea. It's been around since the 1950s. It's come under different names. In the 1950s, it was referred to as cybernetics. But today, what we're looking at is deep learning or artificial neural networks. And what's interesting, it's about creating an iterative process of learning with multiple layers, which are more similar to the way that the human brain actually understands and interprets and manages data and information. And crucially, that data that comes out of that deep learning process is then reinvested and goes back in as an input and creates this learning process. The output of all of this is experiential data, a different form of data which is informed by what is actually happening in the real world. And that is a key, I guess, derivative as we start to understand this space and how it's going to affect us in years to come. The application of deep learning is really the magic already of what we see behind some of the things in consumer tech and enterprise tech. We see tractors that use computer vision to identify weeds and pesticides are applied, and the consequence of that is that about 90% of pesticide use can be reduced by using this deep learning and integrating it into enterprise-type technology. There's been, obviously, significant change over time. The first change that, in terms of wave of software, was disrupting in the PC market, PC software market, and we had industries like accounting and publishing affected. The second wave was the creation of huge tech giants like Google. But the third wave for us is deep learning, and it will reach out in terms of software, as I've said, into all sorts of different industries and very much into the world of education. And as Mark Andreessen has said, software is eating the world. So for us, deep learning is where our focus should be. But to have a sense of the progress that's being made, let's look at the size of artificial neural networks, which is another name for deep learning, and looking at what progress has been made. Back in the 1960s, we were equivalent of a sponge. And what's interesting is that this is similar to Moore's law. Every 2.6 years, we've been doubling the size of the artificial neural networks. So by 2015, we're up to being an ant. Today, we're frog-like. But what's interesting is that by 2060, the size of artificial neural networks will be of the equivalent size and capacity of the human brain. And so the impact for deep learning and the integration of that into our world will be huge. So how will it turn up in our world? Well, for us, it's not a competition between robots and humans. What to us is interesting is the layering of those two capabilities. And that's where we see the most amount of excitement for the future. What we call cobots, working alongside humans, as, for example, in this picture, so no longer having production robots fixed to one place with a simple track of instructions to follow, something that's layered in and interacts physically with humans. And you may think this is fanciful, but today, already 2% of industrial robots are cobots. And by 2025, which is not that far off, 90% of robots will be cobots. So, From our perspective, this is the one to watch in terms of how this integration is going to happen. And collaboration might have felt somewhat different back in 1975, when collaboration was much more in the world of love, but we're now in the world of data. And data, back in 2014, was an obsession with data. Pretty much any data was interesting at that stage. But for us, it's where that data goes. And for us, as we've talked about, it's about experiential data. And experiential data is now turning up in lots of different forms. And one of the more interesting ones which we want to explore is the emergence of what we call digital twins. Digital twins allow us to replicate in a digital world, both for humans and for machines. And this way, we can enhance the learning experience for both. And we create more data points out of that. And it's something that's already happening. A survey by Gartner has shown that companies are already starting to adopt this in a big way in terms of trying to create replications in a digital world. You look at GE, who've used digital simulation to be able to create real-world versions and digital versions of what is a jet engine or in many other processes. And what's fascinating is it starts to be able to give you a glimpse of the future as well as the past. So in the case of a digital version of a jet engine, you can identify and run that jet engine, say, for 10,000 hours as an exact replica of the real-world version of it and see what happens. And it's better, obviously, to see where those fault lines appear in the digital version after 10,000 hours than in the air. But what will this all mean for us? Let me hand you back to Benjamin.
So, if digital twins are for now mostly reserved to smart factories, they could become very soon something of our daily lives and apply to all of us. And actually, that's what Oben, a new AI company, thinks and wants to do. And so I'll show you a little video, but basically this company combines AI, blockchain, and neuroscience to create personal digital twins and wants to put digital twins behind all of us. So what this digital twin was about was basically a replica of a real person. And what was interesting and what's amazing about this digital twin is that this digital twin first copied the voice of a normal individual just by listening to him, and then on its own learn Chinese and Japanese and is able to translate using machine-to-machine interaction. And so that might seem to you like science fiction, but if you think of it, we are quite far down the road because we are already every day producing data and fragments to build our digital twin. So social media is already collecting and producing parts of ourselves. Same with government, same with municipalities, same with healthcare system, same with e-commerce. Companies start to capture digital fragments of the skills we have developed. AI education companies start to collect digital records of what we've learned. And so the emergence of digital twins in normal life is actually not surprising at all. And I want to quote a Scottish philosopher, David Hume, which says, there is a universal tendency among mankind to conceive all beings like themselves and to transfer to every object those qualities with which they are familiarly acquainted. We find human faces in the moon, armies in the clouds. So why not giving a very human face to new forms of intelligence and put them in the cloud? As I mentioned last year, it looks like we are reaching a new stage of evolution. After having spent centuries hunting for food and hunting for money, we are now hunting for knowledge. And we are hunting for knowledge with the help of our digital twins, our digital buddies, to augment our learning experience. And so in a way, a new form of humanity is emerging. One with a capital A and a capital I. One that is collaborative. I hope this word will make it in the dictionary. One that is both experiential and data-rich. And the good news is that this new form of intelligence and learning and experience is not virtual, it's not artificial, it's not digital. This new form of intelligence is still very much experiential. It is intelligence born from new learning interactions and experience between human and artificial brains. And I think we should call it EI for experiential intelligence. So thank you very much, lots of love, and welcome to EdTechX.